I put Bess on the spot more than once in meetings with clients because I do think, to your point, third-party media, independent media storytelling about clients' stories is such a litmus test for the whole idea of being understood, because they are society's representative of what do other people care about.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And we can complain and say we think the media should cover different things than they do, but there's a science behind what they are covering.
Oh, absolutely.
They're paying attention to what their viewers or their readers want to hear about. And if nothing we want to talk about or nothing a client ever wants to talk about or is interesting to media, that should be a gigantic red flag that there's a disconnect about what you're trying to accomplish and who should care. Who should care. So more than once, I know, and one of the things that Bess and others on our media relations team are so good at is when a client thinks they have something that's really important, and being able to respectfully play back, let's talk about what it would take for that to be an interesting story, or what it would take for a media to want to pick up on that story. And again, it's a respectful way of saying you're not thinking about who you're talking to. You're not thinking about who needs to understand this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and that can be challenging sometimes too, because what the actual interesting part of the story is and what the media would actually pick up on is the part of the story the client does not want to tell. And
yes, so that's exactly right. Yep.
Just thinking about that as crisis counselors, which I know that we all spend a lot of time advising clients how to navigate difficult situations. A lot of the time, if that part of the story is already out there, it's really difficult to pull back. And there are clients who come, maybe I'll call them prospects, who come and are like, I just need your help bearing this story or get this out of the news. You are a wonderful counselor this is not a firm that looks to be spin artists. There are people out there who try to do those things. I think it connects right back to being understood. You give a lot of guidance to companies who want to get rid of a story about why that's not really a feasible goal, but also why they're not really seeing the opportunity as well.
And I think two things go through my head. Another line that I use a lot with clients, and I don't mean it to be flip. It's because I really think it's like a 2x4 to their forehead.
Yeah.
I like to say to clients, what reputation do you think you deserve? Mm-hmm. Because all we can really promise over time is to get and maintain the reputation you deserve. If you have a reputation better than you deserve, consider yourself lucky and don't count on it forever. If you have a reputation that's worse than you think you deserve, okay, that's important work for us to have a chance to work on together and figure out how do we make sure you're understood in new ways. But anybody who thinks they are going to get a reputation better than they deserve over time isn't paying attention to how the world actually needs to work. So we had a recent situation with a client who they had a negative story show up in a news story or in a newspaper here. It was a local story, and a very senior executive called me, and he was apoplectic. He was so upset about the story, and what do we need to do about it? And I let him blow off for a while, and then I said, okay, breathe. First of all, please breathe. Yeah. And let's just dismantle this one for a minute. And I'll give you the short version, which was it was a negative story in a publication that not very many people look at. And it's going to be over tomorrow. It has no value for anybody else. It's not going to get picked up. Nothing is going to happen. Just let it go. Just let it go. And get back to focusing on what is it you want to be known for? What's the reputation you deserve, right? And build back on the reputation you deserve. Sometimes you get a hit, and sometimes it's not even fair. Let it go.
Yeah, I think that's so hard for people to understand, to just let it go. I mean, I've worked with a number of clients where they want to respond, they want to tell their side, and it's like, nope, just let it run its course. Chances are it'll be out of the news and you said, a day, and life goes on.
And if it's not, then that's an opportunity to be more proactive.
Absolutely.
Another thing that you have taught all of us and that we seek to do for clients is helping them get back on offense instead of it always being defense and trying to react to those stories. How do you see this as an opportunity to be better understood.
Yeah. And this is where the proactive side of whether it's public relations or internal communications with an organization or direct customer communication, what's the story that's not getting told?
Yeah.
That really is important for you to be understood. And then we can talk about, I wonder why that story is not getting told. Is it too complicated? Do you think part of it's a secret? I mean, what is it that isn't getting talked about? And let's figure out a way to make that a compelling story. I think that especially the team that we have now that has all this skill at storytelling in new ways, with video, with animation, with all the things we have a chance to do, the ways to get a story told effectively today are so much more powerful than when I started, where you pretty much had words on a typewriter. That's pretty much what you had.
Yeah.
And so I think being able to help a client get back on offense is a really, really important part of the mentality of what we have to bring. Because if you're taking responsibility for being understood and you're trying to do something positive for the world or for your customers or something, that's a story that there's an audience for. Let's get the story told effectively and find that audience. And now you feel like you're on offense.
From my past experiences at my past jobs, and I've seen it where there have been true crisis situations and it was not managed well on the other end of things. And so that becomes really dangerous for an organization, government entity, anything, because the news is going to still put out a story and they're going to go after whatever narrative they can find. And so all of a sudden these non-facts become the narrative just because the news was so desperate to get a story on the air versus waiting for, an organization to get their stuff together so they can put out the actual information. And so I think that's why it is so crucial for, folks like us to be involved in that. That part of the process.
And I think that's why it's really valuable when you're on these crisis teams, Bessie, you and the other media relations folks, to be able to say, there's going to be a story.
Yep.
So it's a question of whether you're going to inform the story or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really, really kind of a 2x4 to the forehead for people. Again, back to what I said earlier, people who are in powerful positions sometimes lose perspective about, we're not ready to tell the story. Well, the story is going to be told.
It's going to be told. So here's your opportunity to help tell it in the way it should be told.
Yeah. You just give them the opportunity to get back under control and think about how to manage the situation somewhat differently, which might include saying, there's going to be a story tonight.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything you guys can do to change what's going to be on the news tonight. So let's, at this point, it's 4:00, or whatever. Let's regroup tomorrow morning and talk about what this is.
I've seen it where clients, like, their first reaction is, let's get some good news stories out there.
Yes.
And they automatically want to pivot there before everything else has run its course. And so I think that has been a challenge in trying to help them understand that, no, it's a process. We need to get through this first, and then we can start, telling those good stories.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those places where that question of who needs to understand what about you becomes important, because if you don't resolve the underlying issue that created the negative story, it's still there.
It's still there.
And in fact, given the way the world works today, it's going to have a life of its own. And so you want to bring resolution to those things that you can. And yes, of course, you can build positive things on top of it if that's what we want to do, or bring, change people's attention span. But leaving something unresolved is almost always a bad idea, right? Almost always a bad idea, just like it is in life, right.
How do you respond when you get those asks for, well, I'm just meeting you and I would like to be in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, or, go from unknown to, if I just get this one story, then things are going to make sense and be better. I mean, we've talked about that a little bit here because getting media coverage has become so hard for organizations. What's your response to an organization who thinks one story in one large publication is a savior?
I think again, it needs to be done respectfully, if at all possible. But I think you just have to help them deconstruct that myth that that's going to happen. Sometimes I like to always talk about, the power of the rhetorical question. Ask a few rhetorical questions that allow the client to kind of think themselves through it and realize that's actually not going to solve their problem.
Right.
Once in a while, there's a situation where it might be true. They just need one hit to get some buzz, and then again, because of the way media now operates, you can create a wave. So sometimes it's worth a conversation, but then I think we also have to say, so now let's talk about what it takes to get that one hit.
Yeah.
New York Times, not an easy target. In fact, most media, not an easy target. And so then you start to be honest with them about, here's what it would take.
Right.
And usually it's a mountain or an effort or a price tag higher than they're willing to pay. And they kind of talk themselves out of it.
Right. And I think the other thing too with that is they have to realize what is going to happen after they do land that big story, and they have to be prepared on their end, because I've seen that happen where out of nowhere somebody lands this huge story and now it's like, okay, what do we do?
Yeah.
We weren't ready for this.
Yeah, right. Now the onslaught comes and nobody gets a response. Yeah, exactly right. I think again, respectfully, one of the things I've come to realize, and as somebody who's been doing communications work literally since I was out of high school, I think I sometimes forget how uncomfortable a lot of people are with communicating.
Yeah.
Having to organize their thoughts and explain it in a time sensitive kind of way. It doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. And so I think respectfully playing back, I hear what you're trying to do. Let's kind of unpack that and talk our way through it. And I think most rational people come to good decisions. Once in a while, there's an irrational prospect. And we have to be willing to recognize those and say, you know what, we're not sure we're the right fit for you. And we certainly do that from time to time. And I've almost never regretted it.